The runaway wagon hit the ruts at full speed, and Tessa Holloway knew she had 3 seconds before the axle snapped and threw her into the street. Her hands burned on the reins, and the freight boxes behind her shifted with a groan that promised avalanche. Then a rider in a tan coat cut sideways from nowhere, leaned out of his saddle like he was picking wildflowers, and yanked the lead horse's bridle hard enough to wrench the entire rig into a skidding halt 10 feet from the mercantile steps. Dust rolled over them both. The stranger steadied her wagon tongue with one hand and looked up at her with blue-gray eyes that held no smile and no apology, just the flat calm of a man who had seen worse and expected nothing for his trouble. Tessa's heart hammered. Her dress was torn at the sleeve. The whole town had stopped to stare, and the first thing she did, climbing down on legs that shook, was walk straight up to him and slap him hard across the face. The crack echoed. A woman gasped. Tessa's gloves stung, and her cheeks burned hotter than the afternoon sun. The stranger touched his jaw, slow, like he was testing whether it still hinged, and his mouth twitched in something that was not quite amusement. He did not step back. He did not raise his voice. He said, "I reckon you are welcome, miss," and turned to gather his horse's reins. Tessa wanted to vanish into the dust. She wanted to thank him. She wanted to scream. Instead, she heard herself say, "You could have warned me you were going to jerk the horses like that." And the absurdity of it hit her the moment the words left her mouth. His back was to her now, but she saw his shoulders shift. And when he glanced over one shoulder, the look in his eyes was so dry and so knowing that her throat closed. He said, "Next time I will holler first," and swung into the saddle and rode away before she could find another word. Mrs. Calloway from the dress shop was at her elbow in seconds, voice low and thrilled. "Tessa Holloway, you just struck a man who saved your life in front of half the town." Tessa pulled off her gloves and tried to smooth her hair, and failed at both. "I did not ask him to grab my horses like some wild stunt rider," she said. But her voice shook, and Mrs. Calloway's eyebrows climbed. The freight boxes had split open and spilled 3 crates of her late harvest apples across the wagon bed. Tessa's stomach twisted. She needed every bushel sold before the railroad assessor came through next week. And now, the whole street was buzzing about her temper instead of her orchard. She loaded the crates back in silence, ignoring the stares, and drove the wagon home with her jaw set and her hands still trembling. Black Ridge sat in a basin of red rock and sparse pine, carved by a dry creek that only ran 3 months a year. The town had grown around a cattle trail and a silver strike that played out 5 years back. And now, it survived on stubborn hope, and the railroads promised to extend the spur line if the land parcels penciled out. Tessa's family orchard, Red Mesa Ranch, clung to the creek's north side, where underground springs kept 30 acres green enough to grow apples, pears, and a few rows of struggling peaches. Her father had died 2 winters ago. Her older brother had taken work in Denver and sent money when he could. That left Tessa, her mother, and a debt to the bank that doubled last month when the irrigation flume collapsed and had to be rebuilt. The assessor's visit was not about progress. It was about buyout. If the railroad wanted the land, the bank would call the note, and Tessa would lose everything her father had planted. She unhitched the horses in the barn and checked their legs for strain. Both were fine. She was not. Her cheek still burned where her glove had connected with the stranger's face, and underneath the shame was a flicker of something else. Something she did not want to name. He had moved like a man who knew trouble, and he had looked at her like he saw straight through the anger to the fear underneath. She hated that. She hated that he had been right to stop the wagon, and that she had been too rattled to say thank you like a civilized person. She hated that Mrs. Calloway would tell the story at every quilting circle for a month. Her mother was waiting on the porch, arms folded, face worried. Tessa climbed the steps and sat down hard on the bench. "Mama, I made a fool of myself," she said, and the whole story spilled out. Her mother listened without interruption, and when Tessa finished, she was quiet for a long moment. Then she said, "Who was he?" Tessa shook her head. "I do not know. I have never seen him before." Her mother's mouth thinned. "A drifter, then? Probably gone by morning." Tessa hoped so. She also hoped, against all sense, that he was not. That night she could not sleep. She lay in her narrow bed and listened to the wind test the shutters, and thought about the way the stranger had steadied the wagon tongue with one hand, easy as breathing, and the way his eyes had measured her after the slap. Not angry, just watchful. She thought about the railroad assessor and the loan officer's last visit, when he had suggested, kindly, that a single woman might find it easier to sell than to manage land alone. She thought about her father's grave on the hillside and the irrigation flume that had taken every dollar she could borrow to fix. She thought about the apples she still had to sell and the buyer in Colton who paid half of what the crop was worth because he knew she had no other market. And she thought about the fact that if she lost the ranch, her mother would have nothing, and Tessa's promise to her father would be ash. Morning came too soon. Tessa dressed in her work clothes, a plain brown skirt and patched shirtwaist, and went out to check the trees. The late harvest apples were small but sweet, and she had 2 more pickings before frost. She worked through the rows with her canvas sack, moving quickly, and tried not to think about the town, or the drifter, or the fact that she had just guaranteed herself a week of sideways looks and whispered gossip. By mid-morning her back ached, and her hands were sticky with sap. She was reaching for a high cluster when she heard hoofbeats on the lane, and turned to see a rider coming up the track. Her heart kicked. It was him. He reined in at the edge of the orchard and sat there for a moment, hat brim low, face unreadable. Then he swung down and walked toward her, leading his horse, and stopped a respectful 10 feet away. "Morning, miss," he said. His voice was quiet, roughened by dust and disuse, and there was no challenge in it. Tessa set down her sack and wiped her hands on her apron. "Morning," she said, and hated how stiff she sounded. He glanced at the trees, at the half-filled sack, at the barn roof that needed patching. Then he looked back at her. "I came to see if you made it home all right yesterday. Your wagon axle was cracked." She blinked. "I know. I had it repaired last month. It held fine." He nodded. "Good." He shifted his weight, and his coat moved, and she saw the gun belt underneath, worn but well kept, and her pulse jumped. He saw her notice. He said, "I am not here to cause trouble." Tessa crossed her arms. "Then why are you here?" He took off his hat and turned it in his hands. "Because you look like you needed help, and I have time, and I do not need pay. Just a place to work for a few days, maybe a meal. I can mend fences, clear brush, fix what is broken." She stared at him. "We do not need hired help. We are fine." He met her eyes, and the lie sat between them like a stone. He said, "Miss, I have been drifting long enough to know when a place is one bad season from going under. I am not asking for charity. I am offering work. If you do not need it, I will move on." Tessa's throat tightened. She wanted to tell him to leave. She wanted to tell him she did not trust drifters, that she did not trust men who appeared out of nowhere with guns and quiet voices and eyes that saw too much. But the irrigation flume needed bracing. The barn door had warped, and the fence line along the south pasture was half collapsed. And her mother's cough had come back, and the doctor visits cost money they did not have. She heard herself say, "What is your name?" He said, "Roscoe Crawford." She said, "I am Tessa Holloway. You already knew that." He almost smiled. "Small town." She nodded. "Small town." She hired him. She did not know why, except that something in his stillness felt steady, and she was so tired of holding everything alone. He set to work that afternoon without ceremony, fixing the barn door first, and then moving to the fence line. He did not talk. He did not ask questions. He worked with the focused efficiency of a man who had learned to make every motion count. And by evening, the south pasture fence was standing again, and the barn door closed square. Tessa's mother watched from the kitchen window, lips pressed thin. And when Tessa came in for supper, she said, "You brought him here without asking me." Tessa set the table. "Mama, we need help. He is not asking for much." Her mother's eyes were sharp. "Men like that do not drift without reason, Tessa. You do not know what he is running from." Tessa had thought the same thing. But she had also seen the way he handled tools, careful and sure, and the way he kept his distance, like he understood exactly how much space a woman alone needed. She said, "He works hard. That is all I care about." Her mother sighed and said nothing more. But that night when Roscoe came to the back porch to collect the plate Tessa left for him, her mother stepped out and looked him over. Unflinching, she said, "You hurt my daughter or steal from us, and I will see you hanged." Roscoe met her gaze without blinking. "Yes, ma'am," he said, and Tessa's mother turned and went inside. 3 days passed. Roscoe mended the irrigation flume, replaced the broken slats in the apple press, and cleared the deadfall from the creek bed. He slept in the barn. He ate on the porch. He spoke only when spoken to, and even then his words were spare as winter grass. Tessa found herself watching him when she thought he would not notice. She watched the way he moved, economical and alert, and the way his jaw tightened when he lifted something heavy, and the way his eyes tracked the horizon every time a rider passed on the road. He was afraid of something. She was sure of it. And that made her afraid too. On the 4th morning, she brought him coffee while he was bracing the flume. He straightened, surprised, and took the cup. "Thank you," he said. She nodded and leaned against the flume post, studying him. "Where are you from?" she asked. He drank the coffee and did not answer right away. "Kansas," he said finally. "Long time ago." She waited. He said, "I was in the war. After that I worked cattle drives, ranch jobs, whatever I could find. Never stayed long." She asked, "Why not?" He looked at her then, direct, and she saw weariness in his face that had nothing to do with labor. "Because some places do not let you stay," he said, and she knew he was not going to explain. That afternoon the railroad assessor arrived. He came in a black carriage with a driver and a leather satchel, and he walked the property with a clipboard and a measuring chain, while Tessa followed, stone-faced. His name was Mr. Denton, and he smiled too much and called her my dear in a tone that made her skin crawl. He said, "This is fine land, Miss Holloway. Productive. The railroad would offer a fair price." Tessa said, "We are not selling." He clicked his tongue. "The bank holds your note. If they call it, you will have no choice. Best to sell now while the terms are generous." She said, "We will pay the note." He looked at her like she was a child pretending at business. "Of course, my dear. Of course." Roscoe was working near the barn when Denton left. He watched the carriage roll away and then walked over to where Tessa stood, fists clenched, breathing hard. She said, "They want the land. They have wanted it since my father died. They are just waiting for us to break." Roscoe's jaw tightened. "How much do you owe?" she told him. The number sat between them, heavy as a millstone. He was quiet for a long time. Then he said, "There are other buyers. You do not have to sell to the railroad." She laughed, bitter. "The railroad owns the only rail line. If I do not sell to them, they make sure I cannot sell my crop anywhere else." He looked at her. Sharp. "They threatened you." She shook her head. "They do not have to. Everyone knows." That night, a storm rolled in from the west, fast and cold, and the wind tore shingles off the barn roof and sent the horses into a panic. Tessa ran out into the rain in her nightgown and coat, fighting to calm the animals, and Roscoe was already there. Voice low and steady, hands sure on the halters. Together they got the horses into the far stalls and closed the shutters against the wind. Rain pounded the roof. Lightning cracked close enough to rattle the walls. Tessa's hair was plastered to her face, and her coat was soaked through. Roscoe's shirt clung to his shoulders, and his hat dripped water. They stood in the narrow aisle between the stalls, breathing hard, and the storm roared around them. She started to laugh. She did not mean to, but the absurdity of it hit her all at once. Standing soaked in a barn in the middle of the night, with a man she had slapped 4 days ago, and the laughter bubbled up uncontrollable. Roscoe stared at her. Then his mouth twitched, and before she knew it he was laughing too, quiet and rough, and the sound of it broke something loose in her chest. She said, "This is ridiculous." He said, "Yes, ma'am." She said, "I do not even know you." He said, "No, ma'am." She stepped closer, rain dripping off her chin, and looked up at him. "Why did you really come back?" she asked. His smile faded. He said, "Because you reminded me that some things are worth staying for." The words hung in the air. The rain softened. Tessa's heart hammered, and she did not step back. She said, "You are running from something." He did not deny it. He said, "Yes." She said, "Will it follow you here?" He looked away. It might. She should have been afraid. She should have told him to leave. Instead, she said, "Then we will face it when it comes." He looked back at her, and the surprise in his eyes was so raw that her throat ached. He said, "You do not owe me that." She said, "Maybe I do. Maybe you saved more than my wagon." 2 days later, word came that the bank was calling the note. Tessa read the letter twice, hands shaking, and then crumpled it and threw it at the wall. Her mother wept. Tessa wanted to scream. The assessor had moved faster than she expected. The bank wanted full payment in 2 weeks, or the property would be seized and sold. There was no way to raise the money. The crop was not picked. The buyer in Colton would not take apples until after the frost. Tessa sat on the porch steps and stared at the orchard, and felt the world closing in. Roscoe found her there at dusk. He sat down beside her, not touching, just present. She said, "We lost." He said, "Not yet." She turned to look at him. "What can we do?" He was quiet for a moment, and when he spoke his voice was careful. "There's one way to buy time. You could marry." A married woman with a working partner looks different to a bank than a single woman alone. It might be enough to renegotiate the note. Tessa's breath caught. She said, "That is insane." He said, "Maybe, but it would work." She stared at him. "You are talking about us." He met her gaze, steady. "If you want." Her mind spun. A marriage of convenience. A bargain. It was desperate and outrageous, and it might be the only chance they had. She said, "You do not know me. You do not owe me this." He said, "I know enough. And I am not offering out of charity. I need a place to stay. I need a reason for people to stop asking questions. This helps us both." She searched his face. "What are you hiding, Roscoe?" His jaw worked. He said, "I am wanted for a crime I did not commit. There is a warrant. If the wrong people recognize me, I will hang." She should have recoiled. She should have sent him away. But she heard the truth in his voice. And she thought about the way he had fixed her barn and braced her flume and stood beside her in the storm. She said, "What crime?" He said, "Murder. A man in Kansas. I was there, but I did not kill him. No one believed me." Tessa's heart hammered. She said, "Do you have proof?" He shook his head. "I have nothing but my word." She looked at him for a long time. Then she said, "I believe you." He blinked, like the words hit harder than a fist. She said, "If we do this, it is a bargain. We stay married until the ranch is safe. Then, if you want to leave, you leave. No questions." He said, "And if you want me gone before that?" She said, "Then you go." He nodded slowly. "Deal." She took a breath. "Deal." They married 3 days later in the front room of the justice's house, with Tessa's mother as witness and no one else. Tessa wore her Sunday dress, dark blue with a lace collar, and Roscoe wore a clean shirt and looked as grim as a man facing execution. The justice read the vows in a bored monotone and pronounced them man and wife, and Roscoe did not kiss her. He shook her hand, formal and strange, and Tessa felt the calluses on his palm and the tension in his grip. Her mother cried, silent, and Tessa did not know if it was relief or grief. The news spread through Black Ridge like wildfire. Tessa Holloway married the drifter. Tessa Holloway married in secret. Tessa Holloway must be desperate or ruined, or both. The gossip was vicious and gleeful, and Tessa held her head high and ignored every whisper. Roscoe moved from the barn to the house, taking the small room off the kitchen that had been her father's office. They lived like polite strangers, passing each other in doorways, speaking in careful sentences, working side by side without touching. Tessa's mother watched them with worried eyes and said nothing. The bank granted a 6-month extension. The loan officer looked at Roscoe with suspicion and at Tessa with something close to pity. But he accepted the renegotiation, and Tessa signed the new terms with hands that shook from relief. That night, she and Roscoe sat on the porch and watched the stars come out. She said, "Thank you. He said. You do not have to thank me. She said. Yes, I do. You gave up your freedom for this. He was quiet. Then he said, I have been running for 2 years. I am tired, Tessa. Maybe this is where I stop. She looked at him, and the loneliness in his voice made her chest ache. She said, maybe it is. The days grew colder. They finished the apple harvest and hauled the crop to Colton, where the buyer paid Tessa half of what the fruit was worth, and smirked while he did it. Tessa took the money without argument, because she had no choice, and on the ride home Roscoe said, we could sell direct. Cut him out, she said. How? He said, I know a mercantile owner in Silver Bend. He owes me a favor. We could haul the next crop there. She stared at him. That is 2 days of rough road. He shrugged. We have a wagon. She wanted to argue. She wanted to tell him it was too risky, that Silver Bend was full of strangers and someone might recognize him. But she also wanted to believe they could win. She said, all right. Let us try. 1 week later, a man rode into Black Ridge asking questions. He was a bounty hunter, lean and cold-eyed, with a scar across his throat and a rifle slung across his saddle. He stopped at the saloon, at the general store, at the livery, showing a worn wanted poster to anyone who would look. The poster had a name and a crude sketch. The name was Roscoe Crawford. The sketch was close enough. Tessa heard the news from Mrs. Calloway, who delivered it with barely concealed excitement. There is a bounty man in town, dear, looking for someone. A killer. Tessa's stomach dropped. She kept her face blank. I hope he finds who he is looking for, she said, and walked away before her voice could shake. She found Roscoe in the barn, shoeing one of the horses, and she closed the door behind her and said, there is a bounty hunter in town. He went very still. Then he set down the hoof and straightened. How long? She said. He arrived this morning. He is asking questions. Roscoe swore, low and vicious. She said, what do we do? He looked at her, and the fear in his eyes was worse than anything. He said, I leave. Tonight. Before he finds me and drags you into it. Tessa stepped closer. No, she said. Roscoe shook his head. Tessa, if he finds me here, you will be charged with harboring a fugitive. You will lose everything. She said, I do not care. He grabbed her shoulders, gentle but desperate. You should care. This is your home, your mother's future. I will not destroy it. She looked up at him, pulse racing, and said the thing she had been afraid to say. I believe you did not kill that man, and I am not letting you run again. His hands tightened. Why? He said, and his voice broke. Why would you risk this for me? She said. Because you stayed when you did not have to. Because you fixed what was broken and asked for nothing. Because I trust you, Roscoe, and I do not trust easily. His face crumpled. He pulled her into his arms, sudden and fierce, and she felt him shake. She wrapped her arms around him and held on, and for the first time since her father died, she did not feel alone. He said, rough against her hair, if we do this, we do it together. No more running. She nodded. Together. He pulled back just enough to look at her, and the rawness in his eyes made her breath catch. He said, I need to tell you what happened. All of it. She said. Then tell me. They sat on the hay bales, and he told her. The dead man was a ranch foreman in Kansas, brutal and corrupt, who had beaten a hired hand to death and blamed it on Roscoe. Roscoe had tried to report him, but the foreman had friends in the sheriff's office and money to spread around. When the foreman turned up shot 3 days later, Roscoe was the easy suspect. He ran because staying meant a rope and no trial. He had been drifting ever since, taking work where he could, never using his real name, always looking over his shoulder. Until Black Ridge, until Tessa. She listened without interrupting, and when he finished, she said, "Do you know who really killed him?" Roscoe nodded. "I think it was the ranch owner's son. He and the foreman were in business together, something illegal. I saw them arguing the night before the man died. But I have no proof." Tessa's mind raced. She said, "If we can find proof, we can clear your name." Roscoe shook his head. "That was 2 years ago, Tessa. The trail is cold," she said. "Not if someone is still afraid you will talk." He stared at her. "You think the son is behind the bounty hunter?" she said. "Why else put money on you now? If you were just a drifter no one cared about, the warrant would have died. Someone wants you found." He swore again. She said, "Then we find out who and we make them answer for it." He looked at her like she had lost her mind. "Tessa, that is dangerous." She smiled, thin and fierce. "So is losing the ranch. So is watching you hang for something you did not do. I am done being afraid, Roscoe. Let us fight." The bounty hunter found them the next day. He rode up to the ranch at noon, slow and deliberate, and dismounted in the yard with his rifle across his arms. Roscoe stepped out onto the porch, Tessa beside him, and the hunter looked them both over with the dead patience of a man who had done this 100 times. He said, "You are Roscoe Crawford." Roscoe said, "Who is asking?" The hunter smiled. "Name is Pike. I have a warrant and a bounty. You can come quiet, or you can come hard. Either way, you are coming." Tessa stepped forward. "He is my husband. He is not going anywhere." Pike's eyes flicked to her, dismissive. "Ma'am, you are harboring a fugitive. Step aside." She did not move. She said, "He did not commit the crime he is accused of." Pike shrugged. "That is for a judge to decide. Not me. Not you." Roscoe's hand settled on Tessa's shoulder, steady. He said, "If I go with you, you leave her out of it." Pike considered. "If you come quiet, she stays clear." Roscoe nodded. "Then let us go." Tessa spun on him. "No, you are not doing this." Roscoe met her eyes. "Tessa, he will burn this place down if I do not," she said. "Then let him try." He said, "I will not let you lose everything for me." She grabbed his coat. "You think I can just watch you hang? You think I can go back to picking apples like you never existed?" He cupped her face, quick and desperate. "You are stronger than you know," he said. "You will be fine," she said. "I do not want to be fine without you." Pike cleared his throat. "Enough. Crawford, let us move." Roscoe stepped off the porch. Tessa's mother appeared in the doorway, shotgun in hand, and Pike's rifle swung toward her. Roscoe shouted, "No!" Everyone froze. Tessa's mother said, calm and cold, "You are not taking him." Pike said, "Ma'am, put the gun down," she said. Not until you hear what I have to say. She looked at Roscoe. 2 nights ago, a man came through town. Salesman. He was drinking at the saloon and he talked too much. Said he worked for a cattle baron in Kansas. Name of Thornton. Said Thornton's son killed a foreman 2 years back and framed some drifter for it. Said the son is in politics now and cannot afford the story getting out. Pike's eyes narrowed. Why should I believe you? Tessa's mother said. Because the salesman is still at the boarding house, and he is drunk enough to talk again if you buy him a bottle. Pike was silent for a long moment. Then he said, if you are lying, I will arrest all of you. Tessa's mother said, then go ask him. Pike looked at Roscoe. You stay here. You run, I will hunt you to the end of the earth. Roscoe nodded. I will be here. Pike mounted and rode toward town. Tessa sagged against the porch post. Roscoe climbed the steps and pulled her close. She said, Mama, how did you know? Her mother lowered the shotgun. I did not. But I know men like Pike. They care about money, not justice. If there is a bigger bounty on Thornton's son, he will go after that instead. Roscoe stared at her. That was a gamble. She said, everything is a gamble, son. You just have to know when to call the bluff. 3 hours later, Pike returned. He looked tired and annoyed. He said, the salesman confirmed your story. I sent a wire to Kansas. If Thornton's son is dirty, the federal marshal will handle it. Until then, Crawford, you are free. But if you lied, I will be back. Roscoe said, I did not lie. Pike nodded once, turned, and rode away. Tessa's knees gave out. Roscoe caught her and held her up, and she buried her face in his chest and started to cry. He said, it is over. She said, not yet. We still have the railroad. The next week, the railroad sent men to pressure other landowners. The buyout campaign intensified. Tessa and Roscoe hauled the last of the apple crop to Silver Bend and sold it for 3 times what the Colton buyer offered. They used the money to pay down part of the note, and the rest they saved. They worked the orchard together, mending what winter had broken, preparing for spring planting. They fell into a rhythm, passing tools without words, finishing each other's sentences, moving like they had done this for years. At night they sat on the porch and talked about the future, about expanding the orchard, about buying seed for a vegetable plot, about things that felt impossible a month ago. One evening, Roscoe said, the marriage bargain. We said we would stay together until the ranch was safe. It is not safe yet, but the worst is past. If you want me to go, I will. Tessa looked at him, and her heart hurt. She said, do you want to go? He said no. But I gave you a choice. She reached for his hand. I am choosing you, Roscoe. Not the bargain. You. He stared at her. She said, I love you. I think I have loved you since the storm. Maybe since the slap. He laughed, rough and disbelieving. You are sure? She kissed him, fierce and sure, and he pulled her into his lap and kissed her back like he was afraid she would disappear. When they broke apart, he said, I love you. I did not think I would ever say that to anyone. She said. Say it again. He did. But the railroad was not finished. 2 weeks later, a telegram arrived from the land office. The railroad had filed a claim contesting the ranch boundaries. alleging that Tessa's father had built the irrigation flume on disputed territory. The claim was legally questionable, but expensive to fight, and the railroad had lawyers. Tessa read the telegram and felt the old fear return. Roscoe read it over her shoulder. He said, "They are trying to bleed you dry with legal fees." Tessa nodded. "If we fight, we spend everything. If we do not fight, they seize the flume and the orchard dies." Roscoe was quiet. Then he said, "There is another way. What if we expose them?" She looked at him. "How?" He said, "The railroad assessor. Denton. He offered you a buyout before the bank called your note. That means he knew the bank was going to move. If we can prove he coordinated with the bank to force the sale, that is fraud." Tessa's pulse quickened. "We need proof." Roscoe said, "Denton keeps records. I have seen men like him. They document everything in case they need to cover themselves. If we can get into his office, we might find it." She said, "That is breaking and entering." He said, "Yes." She smiled. "When do we go?" He grinned. "Tonight." They rode into Black Ridge after dark, left the horses at the edge of town, and crept through the alleys to the railroad office. The building was locked, but Roscoe had learned a few things in 2 years of drifting. He picked the lock in under a minute, and they slipped inside. The office smelled of ink and paper and cigar smoke. Tessa kept watch while Roscoe rifled through the desk drawers, moving fast and silent. He found the ledger in the bottom drawer, leather-bound and heavy. He flipped it open and scanned the entries. "Tessa, look at this." She crossed to him. The ledger listed land parcels, buyout offers, and payments to bank officials. 3 entries referenced Red Mesa Ranch. The dates matched. Roscoe said, "This is it. Proof that Denton bribed the bank to call your note early." Tessa's hands shook. "We have him." They heard footsteps outside. Roscoe shoved the ledger into his coat and grabbed Tessa's hand. They ran for the back door, slipped out into the alley, and sprinted for the horses. Behind them, someone shouted. They mounted and rode hard, the night air cold and sharp, and did not stop until they reached the ranch. Tessa's heart hammered. Roscoe handed her the ledger. She said, "What do we do with it?" He said, "We take it to the federal marshal. Same one investigating Thornton's son. If the railroad is corrupt, he will want to know." She said, "They will come after us." He said, "Let them. We have the proof. And we are not running." The next morning, they rode to Silver Bend and delivered the ledger to the marshal's office. The deputy took their statement, photographed the ledger pages, and promised an investigation. Tessa felt lightheaded with relief and terror. Roscoe squeezed her hand. "It is done," he said. "Now we wait." They rode home slowly, watching the sky, and Tessa thought about the months since her father died. The fear, the debt, the slap that started everything. She looked at Roscoe and said, "Do you regret it? Any of it?" He said, "Not 1 second." She smiled. "Good. Neither do I." 3 days later, the federal marshal arrived in Black Ridge with a warrant for Denton's arrest. The railroad office was raided. Denton and 2 bank officials were taken into custody. The territorial newspaper ran the story. The land claim was dropped. The note was restructured again, this time with terms Tessa could actually meet. The town buzzed with scandal. and for once Tessa did not care what they said. She had her ranch. She had her future. She had Roscoe. But the railroad sent one last message. A hired gun arrived at dawn, riding fast, and reined up in the ranch yard. He was young, cold-eyed, and he called out for Roscoe. Tessa stepped onto the porch, shotgun in hand. Roscoe came out behind her. The gunman said, "You cost my bosses a lot of money, Crawford. They want you to understand there are consequences." Roscoe stepped down into the yard. Tessa shouted, "Roscoe, no!" He did not look back. He said, "If they want me, they can face me. Not hide behind hired guns." The young man smiled. "Suits me fine." He went for his gun. Roscoe was faster. He drew and fired in one motion, and the gunman's weapon flew from his hand before he could clear leather. The young man stared at his empty hand, then at Roscoe, and the color drained from his face. Roscoe said, "Go back and tell them I am not afraid. Tell them if they send another man, I will not miss." The gunman scrambled onto his horse and rode away like hell was chasing him. Roscoe holstered his gun and turned. Tessa ran down the steps and threw her arms around him. She said, "You could have been killed." He said, "I know, but I am done letting other people decide my life." She kissed him, hard. "I love you," she said. He said, "I love you too. Let us go home." Spring came. The orchard bloomed. Tessa and Roscoe worked the land together, planting new rows, mending fences, planning the future. The townspeople stopped whispering and started nodding when they passed. Tessa's mother grew stronger. The debt shrank. The ranch thrived. One evening, Roscoe stood in the orchard at sunset, watching the light turn the blossoms gold, and Tessa came up beside him. He said, "I never thought I would have this. A home, a wife, a life." She leaned into him. "You do now." He said, "I know, and I will never take it for granted." She looked up at him. "You know, I never did apologize for slapping you." He laughed. "I deserved it. I scared you." She shook her head. "No, I was already scared. You just made me feel something else. Hope." He kissed her forehead. "Then I am glad I stopped your wagon," she said. "So am I." The federal investigation concluded. Thornton's son was charged with murder and conspiracy. The warrant for Roscoe was vacated. His name was cleared. A letter arrived from the territorial governor, formal and brief, acknowledging the injustice and offering an official pardon. Roscoe read it twice and then folded it carefully and put it in the desk drawer. Tessa said, "How do you feel?" He thought about it. "Free," he said. She smiled. "Good. That is how you should feel." He pulled her close. "I feel more than free. I feel found," she said. You are home." That night they lay in bed, the window open to the spring air, and Tessa traced the scar on Roscoe's shoulder, a long, pale line from some old fight. She said, "Tell me about the war." He was quiet for a long time. Then he said, "It was brutal. It broke a lot of men. I thought it broke me too. But maybe it just taught me what mattered." She said, "What matters?" He turned to face her, his hand cupping her cheek. "You. This. A place to belong." She kissed him. "You belong here. With me. Always. He said always. The summer crop came in strong. Tessa and Roscoe halted to Silver Bend again, and this time the mercantile owner offered them a standing contract. They signed it that afternoon, shook hands, and rode home with money in their pockets and plans in their hearts. Tessa's mother met them on the porch, smiling, and for the first time in 2 years, Tessa felt like the weight had lifted. She looked at Roscoe. "We did it." He grinned. "We did," she said. "What do we do now?" He said. "We live. We build. We grow old together." She laughed. "That sounds perfect." Years later, when people asked how they met, Tessa would smile and say, "I slapped him in front of half the town, and he married me anyway." Roscoe would add, "Best decision I ever made." And it was. The ranch grew. The orchard flourished. They raised children who ran wild through the rows of apple trees and learned to work the land with calloused hands and open hearts. Tessa never forgot the fear, the debt, the moment she thought she would lose everything. But she also never forgot the way Roscoe stayed when he could have run, the way he fought beside her, the way he loved her with a steadiness that never wavered. And Roscoe never forgot the slap, or the storm, or the woman who believed him when no one else would. He never forgot the moment he stopped running and started living. They built a life from hard ground and second chances, and it was enough. More than enough. It was everything.